Katie and I have done a few of these webinars now, and we covered the basics. Last session we went on to planning. I think there's about 5 or 6 up there now, isn't there, that we've done.
Yeah.
What we thought we'd do this month, because we're seeing so many new people come onto the group, and we're seeing from the questions we had last time, we thought we'd be good to do a general question and answer. So it doesn't matter whether you're new, whether you've been around for a while, any questions you've got, we will do our best to answer them. But we'll do a bit of a run through. We thought we did, because so many people are new, you might not know who we are. So we thought we'd do a little bit of an introduction to us. So
yeah.
do you want to
feel
start,
free to put any questions into the chat.
You basically just write.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the next slide, Sarah? Okay, so the plan for today is we'll do a little bit of an intro to who we are, what we've done so far. So you've got an idea of where our background is, where we're going to be able to answer from. We'll do a kind of a very quick, just general introduction to how exams work in general for home educators. We have done another webinar on that goes into it in a lot more detail. So that's on the HEQA YouTube channel for you to go back and look at if you want to. And then we'll point you at some good sources of information for you to kind of go and look at in more detail later. And any questions, I'll say any questions on the way, put them in the chat, anything that occurs to you. Everybody has been in a position where they didn't know anything at some point. So if you're thinking something somebody else will, just ask the question and we'll do what we can to answer it. And if no one asks any questions, we'll just talk about what we did and hope something interesting comes out of it. So Sarah, do you want to do your intro first?
Okay. Well, I started home educating from the start. My boys are now 20 and very nearly 17. So 20-year-old has moved out, got a job, got a life. 16-year-old started college in September for the first time of any form of formal education. So we came from it slowly and gradually. The eldest did go to school for secondary, then came out and did some more GCSEs at home. So I've seen it from both sides. We did a lot of specs between them. So what did we do? We started when my youngest was about 12. We felt he was ready to start studying at GCSE level. At that point, I had absolutely no idea if he'd ever sit exams because he was quite highly anxious around people. But academically, he'd cope with the study. So we decided we'd study the subjects, see how they went. So what did we do? My eldest, when he came out, did English language, which he needed to resit. He did that as IGCSE. Then he did business, psychology, and economics. My youngest started off with sociology and, I always forget these, computer science. When lockdown hit, exams were cancelled, we somehow slotted in doing development studies into a very short amount of time. This child I didn't think would sit exams actually studied one in 4 months. So he was just ready to do it. Somehow it sort of clicked at that point. So he sat those in the autumn of year 10. He then did, they were cancelled again, weren't they, that summer? So we had a whole list of ones that he should have done that summer, but he only did physics in the end, because I got a slightly different journey to probably pretty much everybody else in the home ed world, which I'll mention in a moment, that caused my barriers. Is And then he went on and he's done maths, English language, business studies, a different spec to his brother, economics, citizenship, and another one that I've lost track now. We did 10 in all. So wide range of specs. Now he's gone on to do A-levels in politics, philosophy, and history. History, that's what I forgot, his big favourite subject. Besides working with my boys, as they hit GCSEs, I contacted our local exam centre, which is quite rare because it's a local centre run by home educators. So rather than just get the response of, oh, you can do these specs, I get, oh, you can do these specs, do you want to come and teach them? Because I would use the staff. So that's what I've ended up doing. And at the start, it was just one subject and a little bit of volunteer time. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a lot more than that. And my kids are out the other end. I'm now teaching 9 classes a week, helping run the centre, invigilating, dealing with queries, you name it. But I'm well and truly stuck in the exams world. Oh, that's me, Alex. Katie, do hers.
Yeah, okay. So I've got a similar original story in that we've always home educated. I've got 4 children. My eldest is now 16 and she has just started at sixth form to do A-levels, having never been to school and done all her GCSEs at home. My next one down is 15, so she's sort of year 11 age if she was in school. I've got a nearly 13-year-old, so he's year 8 if he was in school, and a 9-year-old who I lose track of where he is. I have to start counting up on my fingers. I want to work him out. Doesn't matter until he's nearer teens. So we were very play-based when they were younger, and then we got to 10, 11, when you start thinking about secondary school, you start realizing that these exams are going to have to happen at some point. And for many years when they were younger, I thought, well, I just need to know that you can do exams. So I knew that. I knew other people had done it, so it must be okay. But I didn't bother thinking too much about the details. So then at 11 or 12, I realized I had to start figuring out how we were actually going to do exams as a real thing. And that was a little bit nerve-wracking, to be honest. It seemed quite difficult to work it all out, to just know how you figured out what was going to go on, where you're actually going to sit these exams. So yeah, it was all quite stressful. I was actually on, I did a podcast interview 2019, I think it was. So this was when we were starting to think about it. We'd got as far as working out what the GCSEs were. I kind of come up with a plan. I thought my idea was that I was going to get my eldest to do one by the end of year 9, so that we'd have an idea of how it all worked out. It'd be one that wasn't very important. And then if it all went horribly wrong, I could put them in school for year 10 quickly and get school to do the exams for me. So that was my plan. And we decided on astronomy, because that was a subject that my eldest was really interested in. So she had a little look at a past paper. I found that online for her, just to see what it was, not to try and do the exams at all. But just see if it's things you're interested in. She quite liked the idea of it. So we got the textbook, we started working through it. And we were planning to sit the exams in 2020. So at the time I had the podcast interview, I hadn't quite sorted out an exam centre. We're in an area where I'm actually just into Wales. It's an area where there are not very many local exam centres. So I got lucky in the end by finding a friend who was also doing astronomy and already had a relationship with a local school that supported private candidates. So he just said, okay, and also this other child is going to sit it at the same time. So that sorted out for me. And then COVID hit. So instead of doing astronomy that summer at the end of her year 9, she did that in the autumn with the exams after several months of just not knowing what was going on. So she sat GCSE astronomy then, and we'd sort of got into a bit of a swing of things, and that kind of went okay. So she studied maths and chemistry over 2 years. So starting that in year 9 and taking that, it was again supposed to be the end of year 10. There was COVID, so she sat it at the beginning of year 11. And then in the final year, she did English language and English literature and physics. And the English language she did as a 2-year course. over her year 10 and her year 9. And the English literature she did as a course again, but a 1-year course just in that year 11. And physics she did on her own as a 1-year course, sort of studying from the textbook and from past papers. So that was my eldest. So she ended up with 6 side GCSEs that she'd taken in those 3 different sittings. And now she's just in at the local college doing A levels. She's doing English language, English literature, maths and physics, as it turns out. So it's a few weeks in, settling in, but it seems to be going okay. Now, next child down, who was a little bit more confident by this point, because we'd done it once before and it had kind of worked out. So she took business, again, which was supposed to be at the end of her year 9 as our try it out, see how it all works. And it's one that isn't too important. That, again, got hit by COVID. So we ended up traveling to a private exam centre in Coventry, which is about 2.5 hours away from us. So we did local school first time, we did private centre with a big travel and staying in hotels the night before and a lot of expense for that second sitting. And then for the sitting this summer, that was again another local school about an hour away. So we've experienced various different options in terms of what centres have been available. So yeah, the second child did 3 GCSEs this summer. I was expecting her to do maths and A science, and she chose human biology. But she'd started working on psychology and she decided she enjoyed it. She wanted to do it quickly. So we did that over a year and she sat that one this summer as well. And now we're on a bit of a roll, and she's someone who quite likes doing exams. She likes learning new things and having it laid out for her, and she quite likes collecting them. So she's going to end up doing 5 exams next summer. So she's actually going to end up with 9 if all goes as we expect, which is more than I think is required, but you know, it's about what they would do in school, so it's not unreasonable. And next summer she's doing English language, which she's done as a course. She's doing statistics that she's studying by herself this year. She's doing single science, which is an Edexcel International GCSE sort of special. So that is all 3 sciences, but it's a third of the content of if you did them in separate science. So often in schools you get double science, which is a 2/3 of the content of physics, biology and chemistry, and it gives you 2 GCSEs. This is a third the content that gives you 1 GCSE. So she's doing that one. She's doing economics because there's a course that she's taking, and she's doing that one, and she's doing one other, history, that she's done as a course. So there's a question in the chat that says, did they have tutors teach themselves or did I teach them? It's been a little bit of everything depending on the subject. So my background is maths. Maths and sciences, I feel reasonably comfortable with knowing. I don't necessarily know the science myself, but I can read the textbook and understand it, and I can read the mark scheme and apply that. So maths and science I'm okay with doing myself. And the way that we do those is we basically get a textbook. We look up what needs doing in the textbook and they go through. I divide up how many sections they need for a week to get it all done in the appropriate amount of time. They take notes, they maybe answer some of the questions at the end. And then we have a good long period when we go through past papers and we do flashcards and we go back over the content together. And so we've done that for some subjects. Subjects like English and history, I'm less confident either with marking or with teaching those. I feel like I could write an essay, but I'm not very good at explaining it. And I also think those are subjects that it helps to have other people to discuss with. So those ones we have usually done as online classes. So there's a few different providers and tutors that you can use, but all of them have basically a webinar with a teacher for an hour a week and then some homework that gets set alongside. So they've done those. I mean, there aren't really any that I've taught them as such. Usually I'll kind of give them work to do and they're things that I can help explain. So with maths and sciences, I can usually, not always instantly, but figure it out and explain it to them. With psychology, my daughter pretty much did that one herself from the book. Another thing that we've used is a service called Mark My Papers. So they will do past paper marking, and it depends how many of them we've done. But you can basically get your child to sit a full past paper, you know, write it as they would in the exam. You scan that in and you can email it to this company and they will get a trained examiner to mark it for you and to give you some feedback. So I found that very useful for some of the more sort of subjective subjects. So again, things like English and history, where it's difficult to tell if you're not very experienced in it, whereabouts that would be. So there's various different resources that you can pull in, but it's a personal choice.
Yeah, I'll have mine. We only used a tutor for one subject, mainly because mine did not want to work with tutors. They didn't want to do the group aspect, but they also did. My youngest did do local tuition groups, because we have a centre where home educators go for local tuition, where they're taught by mostly, well, in fact, actually all of us are home educators or ex-home educators. Most are qualified teachers, or have got some background in working. If we're not qualified, but we've had similar backgrounds of working with children. And to be honest, I've ended up teaching there. So he's only ever done the ones that I've ended up teaching. So pretty much anything he's wanted to do, I've just taught it and done it in a group, because I tend to do the chatty subjects. Well, ironically, I started off training as a maths teacher, but when I decided I didn't want to teach, I went back and did a degree in social policy. So originally I mopped up most of the humanities subjects. And now this year I've got a maths class as well, just for, I might give that back next year, but one of those things you get sucked in. So for males, we've done it all. I haven't wanted to do it all necessarily. I would have preferred not to teach in physics. I felt sciences are out of my comfort zone, but we managed it because he doesn't want to use a tutor. I thought I just had to learn it. And the same with English. We did the same as Katie was saying. We covered the content, did a lot of past papers, got some marked. I possibly spent nearly as much getting them marked as I might have done on a tutor, because I think I got about 3 or 4 marked, and they're not cheap, but that worked for him. So it's all about what works for your child.
Yeah, and it's
there's no right way to do it.
It's about what's available as well. I mean, we would have loved, I think, some local classes, but they just didn't exist around our way. So that's not a thing we did. They've done some other classes with a company called Dreaming Spires that aren't really anything they're the same similar skills, but they're not designed for an exam, but it's something that they've done because they like that interaction. They like having somebody else sometimes teaching.
Yeah, I will say we have done,
and other kids don't like that. So it's,
yeah, he has done classes, but with other people, just not exam ones. So it's, again, it's finding what works around your.
And there's an in-between route, which is kind of online courses where you don't get as much of the lessons and the tutor interaction. So something like Southwest Science School, it's recorded video lessons and there's questions that you can do. We have taken a few of those. For my kids didn't particularly get on with it. I think they sort of did it all. It just isn't a way that they learn very well. So we haven't used them, but there are a lot of people use those and find it really flexible and really useful. So it's very much what you suit, and well, what your child suits, and also what your budget is as to what things you find best to use. And it can well be different for different subjects. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. We've got, do all exams have similar costs? Not really. So there's this might be one to skip on to the next quick introduction to exams slide, because it's got some of the points on.
Yeah. Can we jump to that question about tutors first, since we're on that?
Yeah, okay, we'll do it. So do tutors know how to mark, guide or tutor for the IGCSE? Is it not all that different from a GCSE? Again, that does depend. Some of the tutors will only are used to teaching and marking the international GCSEs, particularly if they've always targeted the home ed market. So they'll be more familiar with the international GCSE. If they're coming from school and they're coming from a GCSE background, there often are tweaks between the different syllabuses. It's just what you're used to. And it does make a difference, I think, if they've had experience marking it for a lot of people. So some tutors just don't have as much familiarity with marking, as opposed to whether it's the spec or not.
And I'll add the sort of thing, there is a certain thing, there are examples of a training which sometimes it's hard for private tutors to access, which doesn't necessarily mean they're bad at the job. If they've been well experienced, there's ways to learn to mark without having done the training, and the training is usually quite short. So what you want is recommendations from existing home educators, and ideally search for people. If you're looking for a course, search for it on the exams group, because quite often you'll post and you'll get a lot of they're really good. If you search, you will find a couple of negatives, because no course suits everybody. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just it won't. As Katie mentioned, I'm another one. Southwest Science School has got rave reviews. Mine didn't get on with it at all. But it's a style of learning, and really, I should have known that when I signed him up for it. I just had that panic wobble that I can't do science, but it turns out I had to do science, and we did fine. We did absolutely fine. So there we go. Shall we look at the next one?
Yeah, but just one more thing on tutors. I think I would say that even if you sign them up for a course or a class, it is worth staying close to what they're doing, and it's worth putting some of your own effort in to figure out what's needed for the spec, and doing what you can to check in, because I mean, just the way that online tutors work, they don't see your child in person. It's not as easy for an online tutor to know where they're struggling, to know if they're actually keeping up or not. So that's kind of the bit you do still need to be on top of.
I'll add that with any group class, because obviously I teach face to face. Well, I've got a big group of children for 50 minutes a week. That is only a quarter of the time that they should be spending on that subject in a year. So you set homework, you mark it. Obviously, you know roughly where they are, but the parents are responsible for the rest of it. So whatever you sign them up for, you are still responsible for their education. And you need to check, firstly, that it's being done. I think we've all been caught out by that, haven't we? I think you see on the exam group, so many of us have been caught out. I've had my child telling me you're doing work the house set, and no. I spoke to parents and said, your child's not handing in your homework, which, to be honest, we don't really do, because they're supposed to check it. It's just sometimes if I know the parents, I will mention it. And they said, they told me they were. So you do need to.
Yeah, I had one who they switched, the provider switched the system that they were using for logging in, and she never quite figured out how to get at all of the homework the second time, but she'd left it long enough that she felt she couldn't ask. So it was quite some time before I realized that this was going on. But you know, you learn, you live and you learn, us as much as them. So yeah, the question about, do all exams have similar costs? So yes, you're paying for them, you're sourcing the exam centre. There's two aspects to this. The first aspect is the cost is quite dependent on what centres are available, because it's a private arrangement. They can set whatever costs that they want. You know, they need to, and it's, if you're doing it at a school, a lot of those costs are subsidised because they've already got a room, they've already got an exam officer, and they can perhaps just charge you what it costs them to pay the exam board to set and mark the exam, and maybe invigilation if that's specially for you. That's quite rare, but that's your sort of your lower seal, your lower floor of what it'll cost, and that is usually about £70-ish for the exam plus invigilation. Above that, they might set their own admin fee to kind of cover the extra time of sorting it all out for you. If you've got a private centre, They've also got to cover buildings, they've got to cover exam officers, they've got to cover providing reasonable adjustments, because that's not something they should be charging separately for, but they have to pay for it, so that's got to come in somewhere as well. So you'll find costs for private centres are usually higher because they've got to account for that. It's not hard and fast. Some schools also add on quite a lot, but roughly speaking, private centres are going to be more than a school. It varies. You might get lucky, you might get somewhere that basically does it at cost. As a community thing, you might have to pay private centre prices. So that's your first thing. The second thing is it depends what's involved in that exam. So if you've got anything that is more complicated than a couple of exam papers, that's going to cost more. So for instance, if you've got language assessments, they have a speaking part, they need a tutor to do the speaking component. It's more complicated for them to arrange, so those will usually cost more. If you have something that has quite a substantial coursework element, so there are a few subjects like that. There's art and there's film studies, I think, that is possible to do. There are only a few centres that do it. And because quite a lot of that is based on an ongoing assessment that has to be supervised, that means you have to work with a tutor, because there needs to be somebody who's seen the candidate do all of that work, knows it's their own work, can do all of that verification, which means they have to work with you over a long period of time and be associated with the exam centre. So those two things put together mean that any exams that have got quite a substantial practical element are going to be a lot more costly. Right, so we just quickly run through the basic overview. I think sounds like most people here know the basics, and we do have more detail on this elsewhere. But basically, yes, you don't need to match the school system. As we've said, you can split it up across different sittings. You can sit them earlier, you can sit them later. Some kids just aren't ready at 16, but they are at 17. In the scheme of things, it doesn't matter. There was a 90-year-old sat his GCSE this summer. There are no age limits. It's what is right for your child when they're ready. You do have to pay for the exams, and you have to find the exam centre. It's very rare that the LA or anyone will help you with that. Generally speaking, you're on your own. You need to find that out. You can do wider subjects, so you don't have to do the set of exams that a school would do. So again, we mentioned astronomy, there's classical civilizations, there's ancient history, there's environmental management. There's a bunch of different GCSE subjects that they don't often offer in schools. And you can not do things. So again, my daughter, she's doing the combined science, but that kind of came in a bit late on because she got interested in psychology, which needs more of a scientific base. Before that, she was thinking she would probably just do history and things that weren't very sciencey at all. So she was just going to do human biology as a single science. You don't have to do all three sciences like you do in school. It depends on what you want out of that, whether you want that broad base, whether you need it for next steps, but the choice is yours. There are alternatives that are sort of similar levels, but either assessed differently or cover different subjects. So for instance, there's arts awards, there are different sports certificates. Is there anything else there, Sarah, that you can think of?
I think we should probably briefly mention functional skills.
Yeah.
So functional skills is one that's starting to be used more. I think we've seen it come popular in the time we've been home educating, haven't we? Level 2 is roughly equivalent. It's judged. You sometimes hear it said it's a level C for a GCSE. It's not quite as simple as that because it's assessed in a different way. It's a different amount of content. So functional skills can be a brilliant route for some children that might struggle to get the GCSEs or IGCSEs, but they won't be accepted for everything. And it's a case of doing your research. I'm probably not making that decision too early. So sometimes we see it on the groups, people saying, my 13-year-old, I don't think they'll manage GCSEs. They might not at 13. Mine, I said mine probably wouldn't have done at 13. 16, absolutely. I didn't think mine would ever pass English. I thought that was going to be a real struggle. We got reasonable adjustments. We got time. He got a 9. So it's doable for, in some cases. But it's a case of knowing your child, working out what they want, and will those qualifications get them what they want. And sometimes, as we said, time allows.
Yeah, we do see a lot that there are kids at 16, 17 who actually are able to do things that their parents would never have thought they were on track for 11 or 12. They can change very suddenly at that teenage stage, but sometimes don't. I mean, sometimes you know your kids and you know that exams, it's not necessary for them, it's not what they want, or maybe it's just not going to happen with you at home and they'd rather do it at college. They'd rather start, and there are level 1 courses typically at colleges that are designed for children who have been through school and didn't get any exams, because that happens. There's a good proportion of kids who will go through school the whole time and end up without the grades that they want. So there are post-16 options as well that can take college entrances for vocational courses. So it's very much look at your child, look at what they need to do next. Don't just go on what everybody else says in the group, because I mean, quite often you only need 5 GCSEs to go on to A levels, but then there are some areas where all of the colleges want 7 or 8. So check your own situation first. Yeah, I think that's it. The basics, and you can change your mind. So even if you do have your plan set out, maybe they don't like that subject, even after they've spent the year studying it and it's just a grind, change it. Maybe actually they're capable of doing more than you thought. You can change that. There are time limits. You can't, you do have to put in for an exam some period of time before you actually sit it, but there is flexibility and you can wait a year, and there's always time to adjust it if that's what's needed for your child.
I should say nothing is compulsory. GCSEs are not compulsory. So if say there's alternative qualifications as going to college on a lower level course, or getting an apprenticeship, what have you. There are options, but it comes down to research. Research your local options, knowing your child.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the next one?
Yep.
Okay.
So next bit is you do need to know that you're going to be able to sit an exam before you get too far into studying. So again, that's a case of looking at your, asking around, finding out what centres are available to you. I mean, you usually will be able to find a centre for anything, but that might involve travelling a really long way. So, some people will prefer, say, Cambridge for English language. They like the course a bit better. But if that means you've got to go 3 hours for an exam centre, and if you did Edexcel, there's one half an hour away, that might tip the balance in terms of what you want to do. So it's worth checking in on local options, getting a good idea of what's available before you commit yourself to subjects and exam boards. Sometimes you can't be completely sure, because if you're in an area like mine, it sort of relies a bit on goodwill, and they come in, the schools that support that will come in and out of rotation quite frequently. So you can't be 100% sure, but you can get an idea of what's available, what are easier to arrange for in your area.
I've muted my.
Right, so we've got a couple of questions in the chat. We'll go to that now.
There we go. Okay, there we go.
So ones that do have
oh wait, so there was that number of GCSEs to be sat in a year.
Yes, sorry, my computer went a bit haywire.
It might have been me clicking buttons. I had a panic when I muted myself when I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
So Again, as you say, it totally and utterly depends on the child. My eldest did 3 totally from scratch and resat English with a different spec, so 4 in a year, and we found that very doable. My youngest did, he largely studied over longer periods in the year. He did some in a year. He did some, I mentioned he did 1 in 4 months. What I will say I found is after the first ones, we got quicker.
Yeah.
He passed 1 of his based on, with no textbook, nothing like that the last year. Possibly we'd studied it properly, he would have got a better grade, but I mean, he got a good grade with what he did do. But he managed to pass it based on the general interest in the subject and being good at exams. And all that knowledge came from all those previous subjects. So
Yeah.
they do build together.
Yeah, there's a few things that go into it. There's how long it's been studied for and how many you're kind of actual exams you're going to, and that it can depend how long you've got to travel to the exam centre. So the most they've actually done in 1 year is 3 each, but I had 2 daughters who are a year apart, so there were 6 exams between the 2 children last year, and just logistically from my point of view, that felt like quite a lot to keep track of. It was doable, it was okay, but it felt quite busy. And one of the things that we want out of home education in my family is for things not to be too busy, for us to still allow time outside of that. So I would rather spread things out and take longer, but have some free time for the other things they want to do. Some kids actually would rather just get it all done in a short period of time.
Yeah, we did 10 exams this summer from 1 child, but we live 20 minutes drive from the exam centre, which makes a huge difference too. And we were there as it happened, as I say, I worked there, so we were there every single day in June anyway, so it doesn't really matter to us. We just lived there for that month.
And I've got younger children that I'm trying to balance as well, so again, there's only so much capacity from me to focus on the exams, so we spread them out more. But I'm like, one of my daughters doing 5 next year, and I think she'll be fine with that, but it makes sort of the revision harder. It swings and roundabouts.
A-levels in 1 sitting, so that is generally accepted as the rule, but you are always best to check with the universities. It will depend on the course. Sometimes you hear examples where they don't, but the general perception is that they want it. I don't know if you've got any more to add to that.
Yeah, it depends how competitive it is, I think. So if you're looking at, one of the top 10 universities in the guide, or you're looking at medicine, or you're looking at law, or one of the courses that is quite difficult to get into, then yes, they will probably expect you to sit 3 in 1 sitting, because they want to know that you can cope with the course. If it's a course that is not as competitive, that they've either got lower offers for, or they don't get as many applicants per place, then they may not mind as much about that. So it's a bit of a case of judge where you're going to, and again, also judge what grade you're going to get. If you're not going to make the offer by doing too many in one go, then it doesn't matter whether they want that or not. So you've also got to judge it against what's right for your child. Generally speaking, if you can, taking 3 A-levels in 1 sitting gives you the most options, because that's what most people do, and that's kind of what you'll be judged against.
Minimum age to sit exams. So with the small exception of November GCSEs, which is just maths and English language, they are only for those that are year 12 onwards, because they're designed as resits, and that's just the GCSEs, not the IGCSEs. No, there are no minimum ages. Exam centres, however, can put on their own rules because they are centres. And if you take my exam centre, we are massively oversubscribed. We cannot deal with the numbers that apply to come to us. We have priority list of who we will take. Realistically, unless you are year 11, you will not get a place for English and Maths in summer. Mine wouldn't have got a place for English and Maths in summer, and I teach there. I mean, I suppose I might have, but we didn't. So it does depend on your local options. So again, research. But autumn sessions are quieter. So we usually have space in the autumn for people who are younger. And other subjects where we don't have the same pressure of numbers are fine, usually. So things like sociology and history and stuff like that, we have younger children sit with no problem whatsoever. It's the English and Maths, and some of the sciences that we struggle with. Most centres probably don't have the same issues as we do. But
yeah, and the other thing is to sort of think about it a bit from your child's perspective. It depends, you know, different kids are capable of different things, but for a very young child, particularly if they're sitting at a school and they're in the exam hall with all the 16-year-olds, just sort of that in itself can be more of a stressful experience. So even if they're ready in terms of being able to answer the questions and sit the exam, you kind of have to factor in whether they're also ready for the rest of the exam process, and also what they then want to do with it. So kind of in general, it often isn't a good idea to have a massive gap, particularly if it's something they want to take on to further study. So if they're going to be doing, you know, an A-level physics at, you know, at sixth form at 16, and having taken that 11 or 12 it's quite a big gap in between. There are some kids that do it and they're absolutely fine. Generally speaking, most people don't really kick into exams until actually taking them at age 14, which might mean starting at sort of 12 or 13 on a kind of fairly slow basis. And again, adjust. So you can start off on that work and see how it goes before you kick
and there's
into
also something to think about is how will they react if it's not the grade that they wanted. And there's some maturity there. Some subjects, and also the content. I will say I teach. The subjects I teach, at one point, our head of centre said to me, which part of that has got less sex and death in it? It's some of the sociology things, they are not sociology, yes, but some of the humanities particularly can be quite, they are written for 16-year-olds, remember that. So when you're looking at the course, they are written for that age group. Some of the text on English language, like English literature, for example, some of the topics covered in history, classical civilization was the one that I was mentioning there. But I mean, that's often sat by younger, but you need to think about whether the content will be suitable for your child as well.
Yeah, but essentially there are no limits. It's just working out what's suitable for your child and what the exam centre is prepared to support, because they can set their own rules. Next one is the easy enough to get info for the mark schemes and past papers. So on the exam board websites, which we've got a page of links
You can
on the next one.
Screenshot if you like, or we'll send this out afterwards anyway.
Yeah. So on every exam board's got a website, and on that there will be basically a page for each subject qualification that they do. So there'll be a GCSE maths page, and that will have the specification. That's what tells you everything that you need to know. It will also have on it previous past papers and mark schemes up to round about the November 21 season. They're just sort of in the process of unlocking up to that point now. So sometimes that's only two. I think everyone's got at least 2 sets. And there'll also be a sample set. So those are all just available to download. And then when you get closer to the exam, this summer we had an arrangement with exam boards that if you were put in for an exam, you could also get hold of the latest locked paper. But that's something that kind of comes a lot closer to the exam. Sort of initially you look on the website, the mark schemes, also something called examiners reports that can be very helpful. So that's where after an exam series, the examiner kind of looks through and they flag up kind of common mistakes or things that went well. So you can read through those and it gets you a good idea of what examiners are looking for.
It's important to note as well, if you're doing any of the humanities subjects, when you see the answers, you get what is called indicative content. So that is written after they mark. That is written once they've seen a few papers. So they write that saying, these are the sort of answers that the students gave. That doesn't mean it's the only right answers. So unfortunately, if you're doing humanities yourself, you do have to, in some sense, get scripts with the content as well. But it's doable.
Yeah, right, Sarah, I'm going to hand the next one over for you about access arrangements with a private centre. You'll probably know most.
So access arrangements are starting to be tricky. As Katie mentioned, centres now can't charge for them. I mean, that's really always been the case, but it's been clarified in law. It's been clarified that they can't charge for them. And unfortunately, what that actually means is it's pushing centres to financially hard. So we're starting to see a cutback in them offering access arrangements, but they still do. So what you need to do is contact them as soon as possible. If you think you need access arrangements, find out what they need. They will talk you through your process, and it will vary by centre. And some need more than others, depending on the access arrangements. And don't be surprised to have to do a mock with them, because we have to show normal way of working in the centre for a lot of them. And we also have to be able to prove that we've tried some things which are centre awarded arrangements before we go for the exam board awarded arrangements.
And for any CFS diagnosis, you may find that actually rest breaks, which are one of the things that the centre can award, might be the right thing to do in that situation. So what that happens is you get the same overall amount of time for the exam, but you can sort of stop and take a break in the middle of it for a little bit of a rest. I mean, it can't be huge, but you know, you can sort of take 10 minutes, stop writing for a bit, have a relax, and then go back to it. The other thing, so that's in terms of the access arrangements. There may be others. It may be that something like extra time suits. It's always difficult with those sorts of fatigue illnesses, because you've got to balance up whether it takes them longer to process and write the exam against the overall time of the exam. So if you're turning a 2-hour exam into a 2.25 hour exam, and you've got rest breaks perhaps, then that can all spread out over quite a long time. So in terms of when and how many, again, you can take advantage of, if you're doing international GCSEs, there's usually a winter sitting. Not all schools will support them, private centres usually will. So that is in November. There's one, Edexcel have got a last one in January 23, so that you would kind of need to be in for that now. But after that, everyone's moving to be in November, which is sometimes October. And it's not all subjects, but most subjects for the international GCSEs are available then. So you can spread it out. You can do 1 or 2 in the summer, and you can do 1 or 2 in an autumn, and spread them out over a year or 2. It's a little bit of trial and error. So maybe you do 1 as soon as you can and see how that goes, and then adjust depending on what it is. Again, you don't have to finish everything by 16. It's just fine to take an extra year later. I think you can do 2 years and pretty much still get in for funding, depending on what courses you're doing. I mean, you kind of need to look at personal circumstances there, but it's fine to spread them out as long as you need to.
Back to this quickly, because we probably should mention our GCSEs.
Yep.
So Katie briefly touched on art. So there's some subjects which are very, very difficult to do as home educators. because they've got a high practical component. So with these, it's just a case of finding a centre and working with a tutor that will do it. There are others where the GCSE is mostly exam paper or entirely exam paper to the final grade, but there is still a practical component that the exam centre needs to say that the candidates have done, even if it doesn't contribute. Or, to actually clarify that, they need to say that they have offered to the candidates. It is quite tricky to get your head around. And these are subjects where it makes practical sense to do international GCSEs. Because for these, we don't tend to have the same problem. Some GCSEs do have coursework or practicals, but for a certain set of subjects, the quite important ones, we tend to look at IGCSEs instead. So English language is one. Geography is another because of the field work aspect. Sciences pretty much universally have to be IGCSEs. It's very difficult to find a centre that will do GCSEs for sciences. The odd person manages it, but in all the years I've been following it, it is the odd person, and it's usually come out of school with a close relationship with the school still, type of thing. What else have I missed? Computer science.
Yeah.
So, and that usually has to be Cambridge IGCSE because the EdXL has a practical paper.
And the other thing on that is there are some subjects that are only offered by one exam board, sometimes only as an international GCSE. So for instance, environmental management is one that's only offered by Cambridge as an international GCSE. Human biology, I think, is only EdXL international GCSE. And then there are some exams that are only GCSEs and aren't available as international ones. So it's not the case that you always have to do IGCSEs. You sometimes see that. It's just a case of knowing for each spec what the requirements are and which of those are going to be easiest to do.
And it's important that IGCSEs, when you talk, they are international GCSEs. People confuse that I with some sort of internet qualification. They're not. They are international GCSEs. You can study them exactly the same way as you would do a standard GCSE. So buy a textbook, study it, sit a written paper. Use a course. Applying for college, they are recognised as equal. Very occasionally you get the odd college or even the people that wrote the guidance themselves come back and say, no, it doesn't, they're wrong. Usually point them in the right direction of the guidance and it's all fine. They are equal. When you come to apply for college, quite often on the application, they're all online now. You haven't got the option to tick internet to tick IGCSEs. So I just put GCSEs down. I think you did the same, didn't you, Katie? Most people I know have done that. Yeah, so they don't actually really care that much about the difference. It's usually the odd person in admissions who hasn't really heard of them.
And the thing behind this is that state schools are only funded to offer courses in GCSEs. So they can't offer international GCSEs as a state school because their funding arrangements say, look, we don't have any control over those. We don't want to be paying for them. We only want to pay for the GCSEs. So if you start at college and you need to do a resit, you'll have to do GCSE there. They can't do IGCSE. But independent schools do international GCSEs. Obviously, people abroad do international GCSEs, and they're recognised as the same, difficulty, the same level. They're not always exactly the same content, but they're similar, and they give you similar skills. We're coming up to the end of time. Should we skip on to the home educator links?
Yeah.
Tell you where else you can get more information from.
So the wiki, the SICTOS, it's a bit of a clunky site nowadays. Hopefully at some point we will do some updating of it, of the technology behind it. But in terms of information, it is a good site to go for. It has been the dumping ground of home educators' shared knowledge for quite a few years now. So it's written by home educators, for home educators. If you come across anything that's wrong, point it out on the group, but you'll see the links there. I put a link there to the main page. If you're totally new, I would start from new to exams. If you are looking for information about a subject, I've been working through updating all the subject pages. So most of them now list all the specs that are commonly accessible to home educators, how to access them, where you can find exam centres, where you can find exam papers, mark schemes, the possible textbooks, because quite a few specs have more than one option when it comes to books. That's really it. It's just a wealth of knowledge.
So we've got the YouTube channel for HEQA is the Home Educators Qualifications Association. And that's an organisation that got set up in the last couple of years after we had the COVID issues. And we talk to people like Ofqual and the DFE and the exam boards. So we're kind of able to put forward the private candidate point of view, raise any difficulties that we're seeing across a lot of home educators and how that's working for us. And we can put out information that they give us as well. And as part of that, Sarah and I have been running these webinars. There's ones about just the general process of starting exams, there's ones about choosing specifications, there's ones about planning. So they're just recordings of these sorts of events. This recording will go up on that YouTube channel as well. So that's worth having a look at if you prefer, whatever suits you best. So if you prefer watching, go and watch the YouTube channel. If you prefer reading, go and look at the wiki. And if you prefer asking people questions and getting answers from individuals who are there and answering your specific question, go to the HE Exams Facebook group, which is this next link. And that has lots and lots. I think it's over 10,000, it's about 14,000, I think, members. I'm not all of them are active, but there's usually several hundreds of people who are either about to study for these sorts of subjects or have done it a lot before. And if you ask a question in there, you will get a lot of people's individual responses. As we've said before, their responses might not match your situation, so you've kind of got to bear that in mind. So just because somebody else says, my child really loved this and we've got this great exam centre next to us, that might not be true for your child, but you can get lots of experiences and pull from them to work out what you need to do.
And local home educators. So some areas are luckier than others with active groups, but do ask on local groups, even if it looks like there's nobody with older children. Quite often they're lurking. So they might meet for coffee, they might be able to offer advice, they might be able to tell you where they sat exams. It's a good place to get advice about local centres. Local knowledge is quite important. Some areas have specific Facebook groups about exam centres in that area. So not all of them, it depends. As everything with the home ed community, it's volunteers. So it does depend how active the people locally are. So we've finished spot on time. I
think we have. Yeah.
You've got any more questions?
Final questions from anyone? No, I think we're good. So you can screenshot these. This will go up on the HEQA YouTube channel in a few days when we've done all the editing. You can come and look at all of these places and find out more information. We'll be doing another webinar on some topic we haven't thought of yet, some point soon.